Szanowni Państwo, witam Państwa w trzecim dniu kongresu Polska Wielki Projekt. Ja nazywam się Tomasz Kępski, jestem dziennikarzem TVP Kultura i mam niezwykłą przyjemność, że mogę uczestniczyć w tym wydarzeniu i także towarzyszyć Państwu. A jest to wyjątkowy dzień. Dziś po raz drugi w historii kapituły zostanie wręczone szczególne odznaczenie. Medal Odwaga i Wiarygodność. Odznaczenie jest wyrazem wdzięczności i uznania za pomoc Polsce w szczególnie trudnym okresie jej historii, za wspieranie polskiej kultury i twórczy wkład w ideę Polska Wielki Projekt. I have great honor to welcome special guest of the Congress. Szanowni Państwo, wielki, wybitny brytyjski filozof, pisarz i kompozytor, profesor Roger Scruton. Witam bardzo serdecznie marszałka Sejmu Rzeczypospolitej Polskiej, pana Marka Kuchcińskiego. Witam prezesa Prawa i Sprawiedliwości, pana Jarosława Kaczyńskiego. Są z nami także goście z zagranicy. I warmly welcome guests from abroad. Pani Baronessa Caroline Cox, założycielka i prezes Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust. Pani Jessica Douglas-Hume, brytyjska artystka i pisarka. Pan Zsolt Németh, węgierski polityk i ekonomista, przewodniczący Komisji Spraw Zagranicznych Parlamentu Węgier. Pan Aleksander Tomsky, czeski politolog, wydawca i publicysta. Drodzy Państwo, szczególnie ciepło witam obecnych na sali członków kapituły Nagrody imienia Lecha Kaczyńskiego oraz medalu Odwaga i Wiarygodność. Witam pana profesora Zdzisława Krasnodębskiego, przewodniczącego kapituły. Witam pana Andrzeja Gwiazdę, wybitnego działacza Solidarności. Pan Andrzej Gwiazda przybył na dzisiejszą uroczystość wraz z małżonką, panią Joanną Dudą Gwiazdą. Witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Witam pana sędziego Bogusława Nizieńskiego. Jest z nami pan Jerzy Kalina, rzeźbiarz i performer. Witamy serdecznie. Witam panią minister Joannę Wnuk-Nazarową, dyrektor Narodowej Orkiestry Symfonicznej Polskiego Radia w Katowicach. Witam panią Marynę Miklaszewską, sekretarz kapituły. Let's begin the first debate, which title is Roger Scruton and Jagiellonian Trust in Poland. Zapraszam panią Agnieszkę Kołakowską, filozof i filolog klasyczną. Witam pani Agnieszko bardzo serdecznie. Wraz z gośćmi, z panią Jessicą Douglas-Hume, Caroline Cox, panem Aleksandrem Tomskim, Zsoltem Némethem oraz panem profesorem Miłowitem Kunińskim, prezesem Ośrodka Myśli Politycznej, panem Markiem Matraszkiem. I rozmowę poprowadzi pani Agnieszka Kołakowska. Udanych obrad Państwu życzę.
Jeszcze jedno krzesło jest potrzebne.
Czy możemy dostać jeszcze jedno krzesło? Tak? Tak. Good morning, everyone. We are here to honor Roger Scruton, Sir Roger Scruton, as to our delight he now is, at last, and all his achievements, particularly in Poland, but also in other countries of Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia, and in Hungary, during the dark days of communism, in bringing hope and the hope of freedom and scholarship and culture and conservative philosophy in those dark days. And we also have friends here who have already been introduced, who worked with us from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary in those days, in the 1980s in particular. We are here to talk about the Jagiellonian Trust, which Roger founded and organized, which was aimed at bringing help to Poland, but also, again, we worked a little bit with our friends in Czechoslovakia and in Hungary. And in the Jagiellonian Trust was Roger, Jessica, Carolyn Cox, and myself, and Marek Matraszek, who was our secretary and who miraculously has managed to unearth in that big book the minutes of all our meetings. So he will be able to provide details and dates and anecdotes. And he will also help me, I think, in keeping order because he's much better at it than I am. We have, I believe, a little less time than we thought, about an hour, and we will go on until we run out of things to say, which may take somewhat less than an hour. We shall see. I will start by asking Roger, perhaps, to talk about how it all started and why, and then other people will chip in. Roger.
Yes, let me take yours. We know this one works. I suppose I became involved in Polish opposition culture, partly through visiting this place in 1979, just after the Pope's pilgrimage to his homeland, and being immediately struck by the atmosphere here, atmosphere of enormous tension, fear, and little seeds of hope everywhere. And I thought, well, if there are seeds of hope, one ought to try to water them, to make them grow. And following my visit here, I went to Czechoslovakia, where to give a private seminar to people who were no longer able to teach in a university, and the gathering of young people around them who were no longer able to learn there because they had the wrong political profile. And together with a few friends, we decided we must help these people. And that means send to them what they needed, and visitors, if possible, to relay the message that they were not forgotten. And then I thought, we began that in Czechoslovakia. It was difficult and unusual work. It was very hard to get my colleagues in universities to cooperate because they were all on the left and didn't think it was wise to disturb the balance that had brought peace to Europe. You know, the peace, the Soviet peace that they would have liked to impose on Britain as well. So it was very hard to get these enterprises going, but much easier here, I discovered. And at a certain point, visiting the country, I went to the Catholic University of Lublin, the last independent university in Eastern Europe, and the only independent university in Europe, if you think about, if you mean by independent, intellectually independent. It was the only place in Europe where you could speak freely in the cause of conservatism. And having done this, I encountered this young lector who was spending a year there from England, Marek Matraszek, who is a young boy who was looking around himself to discover whether there were any other English anti-communists. And I introduced myself to him as a visiting anti-communist, looking for recruits. And he said, here is one, and offered himself as a sacrifice. So I thought, that's great, we've now got a team. And then I went back to England and found a few more. Jessica Douglas-Hume, who's been an intrepid opponent of communism all her life and wanted to join in and do things, and Caroline Cox likewise, and Agnieszka, whose credentials don't need any explaining in this country. So we set up a little trust to raise money and to send people to visit their colleagues and sympathizers over here, take to the place where the action was the thing that was needed for the action, namely books, discussions, ideas, material for the Samizdat press, some money, though we didn't have very much money, and in general, the British sense of cooperation, which is the greatest asset that our country has. In every emergency, the English at least, and I think the Scots also, up to a point, collaborate with each other. They form little communities of opposition and enterprise and try to solve the problem. And this is the greatest asset that we have, and the reason why we are still independent, or we will be perhaps in a few days' time. This asset is much appreciated in Poland, where you have all the moral virtues, courage, integrity, honesty, and so on, save one, which is the ability to cooperate. So we thought we could add that to the mix and produce a little community of opposition to the communist orthodoxies through the intellectual world and through the little associations in outside universities of people interested in the culture and history of their country. We were very fortunate, and I say this in my speech later, but we were very fortunate to meet Marek Kuniński, who is now, I'm pleased to say, Speaker of the Polish Sejm, who invited us to Przemyśl, a beautiful little town, a Central European town of the old sort, which was home to a local culture of its own, and through them we began to build networks which for us were extremely valuable. I suppose we can't claim credit for having overthrown the communists. That's a pity, but that required a mass movement. But you did have a mass movement at the time, Solidarity, which was one of the most extraordinary events to have lived through. And I'm personally extremely grateful that I lived through that great event. It was the first genuine mass rebellion by the working class in history. And it was a rebellion against socialism and not for it. And that is a remarkable thought. This is a great disproof here of the Marxist view of history. We were all looking on as this happened with admiration and wonder, and it changed the nature of the world. Obviously, in Poland, everything that happens in Poland remains controversial in Poland. But it's not controversial elsewhere. We are happy that Solidarity existed and that it did what it did, and we think that it did change history more completely even than the Communist Party had. So that's essentially my introduction to our work. It was, I think others here know much more of the detail, but I should say that at a certain stage we extended our reach into Hungary because for a variety of reasons it seemed absurd not to go to Hungary if we'd been operating in Czechoslovakia and Poland, for one reason above all, which is that the Hungarians had already rebelled against communism in 1956 and had fought for their country against it. So surely we thought there must be people there who would sympathize with what we had to say and who would enjoy our visits and our support in creating oppositional networks of their own. And sure enough, we found these people. This was in the mid-1980s to late 1980s, when they were emerging in the College of Law, in fact, in Budapest. That's to say, Viktor Orbán, Zsolt Németh, and Istvan Stumpf, who were at the time young men, young idealistic men who believed in the value of being young and that the future lay with the youth. Fortunately, I was able to persuade them that the future actually lies with the older. And they changed their line and ceased to be the party of youth and became, like me, the adherents to the old and the weary. So Fidesz, as a result, became the governing party in Hungary. And Zsolt is still with us, and of course a marvelous figure in his country today, one who exemplifies the combination of national loyalty and broad European culture, which I think is what all of us now need. And I think that's perhaps, if we have a task for the future, it is that, to try and show how national identity and European culture are not in opposition, as the European Union wants to tell us, but are the same thing.
This one, okay, yes. Well, now that Roger has mentioned our Hungarian friends, perhaps it is a good moment to ask Zsolt to say a few words.
Thank you. I have a fantastic speech, but I don't read it out for the reason because I see that our number is greater than that. But I will make it available to all of you. First of all, I would like to comment upon the name Jagiellonian. Our cooperation with the Jagiellonians went a bit back in history. As you know, we started it in the 16th century when the Jagiellonians ruled Hungary, and we had the Polish ruling house being the rulers of our country. As later on, we have given you Báthory, and before then we have given you the Anjous. So our cooperation throughout history is quite substantial, and that's why it was a great privilege for us that the Jagiellonian Fund decided to turn attention to us. In 1989, I was just reminded by Marek yesterday that we were offered a very unique donation from the Jagiellonian Fund Trust. Point G, January 1989, Fidesz, Marek Matraszek reported a request from Zsolt Németh for a donation, £1,000, to enable the Fidesz office in Budapest to be computerized. After some discussion, it was agreed that given the importance of the Fidesz group, the request would be granted. It is in this record. He has just came across that. So the Fidesz group, it's correct because at that time Fidesz was not even a party. We were a group. We decided to run on the elections only at our October Congress in 1989. Then right away, as a consequence of this friendship, we got to know each other in Oxford with Marek. I got to know Roger and others, friends in the foundation. And Roger since then became a very close friend of us. And when we talk about Roger Scruton now in Hungary, the first term which comes in our mind is conservative revolutionary. And we all know that this is a contradictio in adjectum. There is no conservative revolutionary, theoretically, but his person is a proof that there is a conservative revolutionary. Roger has, in the just recent history, in 2006, for example, visited the Belgian party, the Flemish nationalist party. This has a negative judgment in itself. We all remember to that performance of Roger, which initiated a major debate throughout Europe around his personality. It was pictured what a scandalous step it was by him to visit the Congress of the Flemish nationalists. But at that Congress, he stood up and he had a speech which was not a kind of ideological or party political speech, but he said that, first of all, we need to say no to all dictates which are coming upon us from any European institution or anywhere. We don't need to accept dictates. We don't need to accept enforced approach to freedom of expression. Everything can be and should be debated, because if we don't debate that, it may result in a very serious situation later on. And he said also in that speech that nations and nation states are not part of the history, are not negative phenomena, but they are part of our future, and they are positive contributors of the European future. You know, in Hungary we are in Fidesz many Protestants, and when I look at our friend Roger Scruton, Protestantism is always coming into our mind. Protestantism was a revolutionary movement, but it was not just negative. It was a movement which said yes to certain components of the Catholic practices, but it was also a position that you have to stand up for your faith, for your belief. That was the heart of Protestantism. And this is exactly what we feel in his speeches, in his approaches, and that's what he makes a very important impact on Central Europe and on our thinking in Hungary as well. He is very well published in Hungarian, that he is standing up for his beliefs, for his stances. It is this approach, this revolutionary Protestant approach is also positive, and these days we need very much because Europe, we believe, is at a crossroads. Europe requires very much under present circumstances, not just negations. In Central Europe we have debates these days with the European Commission. We have a lot of debates on migration with Germany. And sometimes we are pictured that the Central European countries, the Polish, Hungarian position is just an opposition to the solutions of Brussels. And I don't agree with that. I believe that our approach, the Polish and the Hungarian approach, and other Central Europeans also support this, is a positive view about our democracy and about our future. And as Roger developed in many of his speeches, this is not a debate between Central European countries and Germany, but this is a debate, a genuinely European debate about the future of the whole continent. This is not a provincial debate we are just having, we are in the middle of. And for that very reason, we need to believe that our approach is as relevant for the future of Europe as any other approach. And we need to develop a Polish, Hungarian, Central European approach and vision of Europe, and we do not need to be scared about that. The only thing that Europe is a value, Europe requires a democratic solution. People must support that solution, and the solution has to be, on the long run, sustainable. And that's what we learned from Roger, and that's why I'm very glad to be with you, Polish friends, and I'm very honored that the speaker, Mr. Kuchcinski, and Mr. Kaczynski, the president of PiS, is with us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps this is a good moment to ask Marek Matraszek for an interlude of detail, dates, anecdotes very quickly. Anything come to mind in relation to what we've been saying so far?
Pozwolę sobie mówić po polsku, bo być może ułatwi rozmowę. Dziękuję bardzo Agnieszko i przede wszystkim ja osobiście się czuję zaszczycony, że miałem to szczęście w życiu, że spotkałem Rogera i wspaniałe środowisko, które on reprezentuje w Wielkiej Brytanii. Ja może faktycznie powiem anegdotycznie, potwierdzam anegdotę Rogera w jaki sposób najpierw się spotkaliśmy. Na Katolickim Uniwersytecie Lubelskim w 1984 roku szedłem korytarzem i widziałem ogłoszenie o wykładzie brytyjskiego filozofa o Kancie i o Hegelu. Ja akurat studiowałem filozofię w Wielkiej Brytanii na Oksfordzie, ale nigdy nie słyszałem o Rogerze Scrutonie. A co też świadczy o stanie nauczania filozofii w ogóle jeszcze już w latach 80. w Wielkiej Brytanii do jakiego stopnia wyższe uczelnie były zlewicowane, że tacy wspaniali ludzie jak Roger nie byli w ogóle znani powszechnie wśród studentów. Niemniej faktycznie podeszłem do niego po jego bardzo ciekawym wykładzie i przedstawiłem się. I pierwsza rzecz, którą mi powiedział, było: bardzo się cieszę, że pana spotkałem. Czy pan zna jakichś antykomunistów w Lublinie? I tak się złożyłem, że znałem jednego antykomunistę, który nazywał się Marcin Dybowski i który stał się wielkim przyjacielem naszym i Rogera, a dzisiaj jego książki są tutaj sprzedawane. Świat się potoczył kołem, że tak powiem. Ale z mojej perspektywy Fundacja Jagiellońska ówcześnie w latach 80. była niebywałym odkryciem, ponieważ okazało się, że, i to było znamienne, że we Wielkiej Brytanii bardzo trudno było znaleźć jeszcze w latach 80. Brytyjczyków, którzy byli gotowi poświęcić swój czas, swoje wpływy, swoje relacje, bo osoby, które tworzyły Fundację Jagiellońską w Wielkiej Brytanii, to byli ludzie właśnie jak Roger, jak Jessica Douglas-Hume, Caroline Cox i Lord Pearson z Rannoch, którzy byli, no co tutaj dużo mówić, należą do elity społecznej Wielkiej Brytanii. I to, że tacy ludzie odkryli środkową Europę, to było wielkim szczęściem, ponieważ dzięki swoim wpływom, dzięki swoim relacjom w społeczeństwie brytyjskim mogli zmobilizować bardzo znaczące nie tylko środki wsparcia dla opozycji antykomunistycznej ówcześnie, ale również wśród rządzących. Relacje pomiędzy tym środowiskiem a brytyjską partią konserwatywną i środowiskiem wokół pani premier Thatcher były bardzo znaczące. To, że przy swojej wizycie wtedy bodajże w 1985 roku ówczesny wiceminister spraw zagranicznych Malcolm Rifkin złożył wieniec na grobie księdza Jerzego Popiełuszki, była dzięki rozmowy, które on odbył z tym właśnie środowiskiem, którzy wyjaśnili mu, jakie to ma znaczenie, jakie to ma ogromne znaczenie symboliczne, żeby tą czynność dokonać. Niemniej faktem jest, że to środowisko, które miałem zaszczyt służyć wtedy, zrobiło bardzo dużo dobrego dla tego kraju. Anegdotycznie mobilizowanie naukowców, którzy byli szkoleni, jak przewozić ówcześnie wielkie odkrycie techniki kserokopiarki do Polski. To było zresztą zabawne, jak szło się do jakiegoś profesora Oxfordu czy innej uczelni, dawało mu się kserokopiarkę, która się ledwo mieściła w ogromnej walizce i szkoliło się, jak na lotnisku Okęciu należy czytać książkę, żeby nie patrzeć w oczy celnikom. Było bardzo zabawne. Niemniej włączenie też środowisk naukowych w tą działalność było bardzo cenne. Natomiast jest drugi aspekt działalności Fundacji Jagiellońskiej, który faktycznie należy bardzo silnie podkreślić i w dwojakim sensie. Oczywiście, jak się czyta stenogramy pierwszych spotkań Rady, które się odbywały w mieszkaniu Rogera w Londynie, uderza bardzo cenne i próba znalezienia tych środowisk ówcześnej opozycji antykomunistycznej, którzy oczywiście z jednej strony z definicji byli antykomunistyczni, ale z drugiej strony już wtedy można było odkryć te pierwiastki, które w późniejszych latach, w latach 90. skiełkowały się i urodziły szeroko rozumianą prawicę polską. To były ludzie, którzy w różnych środowiskach, w różnych miastach, właśnie w Przemyślu, w Łodzi, we Wrocławiu, w Warszawie oczywiście, którzy już wtedy myśleli kategoriami nie tylko walki przeciwko czemuś, ale w imieniu czego. I te wątki o kulturze, o przede wszystkim zrozumienie, że nic z tych rzeczy nie odbędzie się bez niepodległości, były bardzo ważne i muszę powiedzieć, że czytając wszystkie nazwiska, które są w tych stenogramach naszych spotkań, ilość, powiedziałbym nieskromnie, trafnych wyborów była znakomita, no bo to naprawdę jest to część historii Polski teraźniejszej, również się mieści w tych wydarzeniach z lat 80. Pamiętam bardzo dobrze nasze silne związki z środowiskiem niepodległości w Warszawie. Więc tyle anegdotycznie, jest tutaj bardzo dużo innych anegdot, ale chciałem podkreślić, jak ważne było, jak unikalny był ten fenomen. Grupa brytyjskich intelektualistów, którzy odważyli się zrozumieć, na czym polega nie tylko walka przeciwko komunizmu w Polsce i na Węgrzech, ale również wiedzieli, że budują coś i budują środowiska, które w przyszłości będą miały ogromne znaczenie dla tego regionu.
Thank you, Marek. That is indeed extremely important. I'm glad you mentioned that. Since we've talked about that, Marek mentioned already the politicization of higher education, which was going on in England at the time and is now also going on. This is something that Caroline Cox, too, was very much involved in. I don't mean the politicization, I mean fighting against the politicization. And just about every aspect of what Marek Matraszek has just spoken of was Caroline was involved in. Unlike many of us who sit around talking about how to put the world to rights, Caroline actually goes out and does it, and she does it in war zones around the globe at enormous risk to herself, and with great courage she drove trucks into Poland. She has very many anecdotes. She also was at some risk a number of times in Poland when she was here, so perhaps I'll ask her now to contribute her anecdotes.
Well, dzień dobry. And thank you so much for being part of this special occasion honouring Professor Roger Scruton and the Jagiellonian Trust. I just want to tell 3 short stories. I'm not really an academic, I'm an activist. So I want to tell the stories which bring back for me the significance of the Jagiellonian Trust and the significance of your wonderful fight for freedom here in Poland. The first goes right back to the founding of the Jagiellonian Trust. I had already had the privilege of coming into your country in those dark days with truckloads of medical supplies for Medical Aid for Poland Fund. And Roger knew that I was already here, and he said, would I like to be involved with setting up the Jagiellonian Trust, which would be a lifeline for your academics and your scholars and artists, comparable to the medical lifeline. I said it would be a privilege, but first story, I said I do not want to do that if it is going to make life more difficult, more dangerous for your people, especially your academics, who already live in a very dangerous situation. So I want to go and ask if this is what you here in Poland would wish us to do. So I went with a young Polish colleague down to your wonderful University of Krakow and met some academics there, and particularly a professor of history, to ask if you would like the Jagiellonian Trust. Now, those were the early 1980s, so we were followed everywhere. I did not want to make life more difficult, so Maciek and I, we walked around the complex 3 times to make sure we were not being followed on that occasion, walked back, we were not being followed. We went quietly into a side entrance, discreetly, and we met some of your courageous academics there. And we said, would you like us to set up the Jagiellonian Trust, or will it be more difficult for you? And I'll never forget the reply from one of your eminent professors. He said, if we do not use the little freedom we still have, then we are already lost as a people. So we got the green light to set up the Jagiellonian Trust. And we're hearing about that today. But just 2 other short stories to remind myself of the price you paid and the challenges you faced for your freedom. On one of the truckloads of medical aid, I didn't drive the trucks. You had to be a professional truck driver, huge 32-ton trucks. But you had to live on the truck with your truck driver for a week at a time. They were gentlemen of the road, I promise you. But they would sleep on the bottom bunk. I would sleep on the top bunk. And on one of these visits, we'd been already here. We'd been in Kielce, Radom, and we finished in Wrocław. And when we started the offloading of the medical supplies in Wrocław, I had a very experienced British truck driver, and we'd lived together for a week, and he was a very good-humoured, very fun guy, a real, we say, cockney. And when we did the offload, of course, it was always surrounded by KGB, by the security, by customs, watching every move. And we were the last offload. So on that occasion, we had been allowed to bring in some copies of the British Medical Journal. Your Polish medical colleagues really wanted to know what was going on in Western medicine. Often we were not allowed to bring in the British Medical Journal. It's hardly subversive. But on this occasion, we were allowed. And I was doing this offload. Tony was on the truck. I was down. He was passing boxes and medical supplies down to me. And I got back, and for the first time in 1 week, Tony was absolutely ballistic with fury. He lost his temper. He was swearing like only a good Londoner knows how to swear. And I said, Tony, what's the trouble? And I will not repeat his language, but he said, look at this. I said, what's the problem, Tony? There are 2 boxes of blank computer printout paper. He said, don't you something, realize we could be in prison for this? I said, well, I didn't, Tony, but if that's the case, shut up. You know, a truck is not very soundproof. They're all out there. Shut up. What can we do? So he gave me a box of journals, and I put the box of blank paper underneath, and I went through the gauntlet of the customs and the KGB without being identified twice. We got away with it. That night, Tony came back to England. I stayed with a Polish doctor, and I said, I don't understand. We had 2 boxes of blank computer printout paper. Tony is an experienced truck driver. He said we could be in prison. Why? He said, don't you understand, in a totalitarian society, blank paper is dangerous. You can write ideas on it. Well, for me, that said a lot. And I was going back to an academic department in my college in London of 20 faculty staff, 16 of whom are Communist Party or further left, who wanted to introduce that kind of freedom into our academic system in the United Kingdom. So that was another battle I fought in Britain. But my final story, and then I will stop, was on another occasion when I dared to do what I should not have done. I mixed the 2 agendas. Medical aid was always tough. At the borders, we were always stopped, and they would spend 10 hours taking everything off the truck, but we were allowed in. The Jagiellonian Trust, we had to be undercover and discreet. On this very bad situation, I was asked by Jagiellonian Trust to bring in some software material with the truck of medical aid. Well, I thought I would get away with it. We arrived at the border. the terrible search went on, taking everything off the back of the truck, the medical supplies. They stabbed open the sterile theatre dressings and grubbed around so they would no longer be sterile. They stabbed open the boxes of gluten-free flour, so the gluten-free flour came out more precious than gold dust. And then they turned to the cab of the truck, which they'd never done before. Now, I had this illegal material for Jagiellonian Trust in my sleeping bag on the top bunk. And they turned to the cab of the truck. I had a lovely Polish truck driver on this occasion, and he had his pride and joy was a leather briefcase. They ripped that apart. They completely tore out that side of the cab of the truck. I thought if they get to my side, they're going to find the illegal material. That would be an expose of Jagiellonian Trust and probably stop Medical Aid for Poland Fund bringing in much needed medical supplies because I confused the agendas. And I was really, really worried. They'd been doing this for 9 hours. I said a desperate prayer. And just as they started to come to my side of the truck, the leader of the team who were carrying out this investigation got a telephone call. He was called away, and we got through. But those little memories of what it was like in your country in those dark days make me really remember the price you paid for your freedom, how I always honor the people of Poland for holding that front line of faith and freedom for the rest of the world. I now work in many other countries who are facing similar situations, and my message, when I speak particularly to young people, is that we who have the privilege of freedom must use our freedom on behalf of those who do not. There are still many people around the world today who are suffering so much, and particularly from the growth of a new totalitarianism, and I think an even more dangerous totalitarianism, militant Islamism, the kind of thing we see in Syria, but it's operating through many parts of the world. I'm not against ordinary Muslims, I have many Muslim friends, but strategic political Islam is growing in Europe, and it's growing around the world, and I believe we who have our freedom must wake up, and we must use our freedoms constantly to protect the freedoms of others who are vulnerable and suffering now their loss of freedom, and our own freedoms in Europe, that we pass on our spiritual, cultural, and political heritage of freedom undiminished to our children and our grandchildren. But thank you, Poland, for all you did in those dark days and the price you paid for freedom for the rest of us.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Jessica, is this a good time to ask you to go on?
Can you hear me? Yes. I will just make 2 brief remarks because I hope there'll be from the audience some questions, and then I would participate more in that. Unlike Roger coming to Poland in 1979, I didn't come until after I knew Czechoslovakia through Roger. And when I did come, in Czechoslovakia, I was brought in through the Oxford philosophers and joined the trust for the Czech Trust. And we then set up the Jagiellonian Trust in the same model as the first one. And I'd just like to say that I was brought in because I was a theatre designer and an artist in those days. And the person who I went to visit first was in Poznan, a theatre director. And I think all 3 of us remember the first moments which really affected us in Poland. And I'd like to pay tribute to the theatre in Poland who actually were putting the message through theatre and through art. And my second point is rather related to what Marek has said, is that actually I think the foreign minister, Rifkind, was very much influenced by us, not by anyone else, for one reason only. Father Popescu was a key overriding symbol, and we followed every movement of what he was doing. I attended one of his sermons, and then that terrible moment, October the 4th, I think it was, when we learnt of his death, 1984, we decided, all of us together, that we were going to use the rule of law and to follow the trial and to then publicize it. We brought in a recorder, we provided a Western lawyer, and it is through all those things we did then that we could then inform the Thatcher government And it is one of the most wonderful people we've ever met, probably, is Father Popłeczko. And with that, I will end. And I hope there'll be questions from the audience, Agnieszka, as well.
Perhaps at the end. Perhaps we'll take questions from the audience at the end, and so we'll finish a bit early. And at the moment, perhaps I'll ask Professor Kuniński to talk about the Polish side of things.
Pozwolę sobie, tak jak Marek, mówić po polsku. Zacznę od tego, że ponieważ wspomniano tutaj środowiska akademickie, moje doświadczenie i mojego kolegi z Instytutu Filozofii Uniwersytetu Jagiellońskiego, Ryszarda Legutki, jest tutaj bardzo istotne. Mianowicie kontakty ze środowiskiem akademickim Krakowa, ale nie tylko. W wypadku Rogera Scrutona, a także Trustu Jagiellońskiego, to jednak głównie były kontakty związane po pierwsze z wizytami osób, które miały wykłady, i to jakoś tak się udawało, że część z tych wykładów była po prostu otwarta, legalna, odbywała się na uniwersytecie. To publiczność była akademicka, studenci, co było najistotniejsze oczywiście, bo chodziło o to, żeby młodzi ludzie mieli okazję zapoznać się z takimi tematami, które należą ogólnie rzecz biorąc do filozofii politycznej. Problematyka praworządności, ustrojów politycznych, wolności jednostkowej, własności i tak dalej. Więc te rzeczy odbywały się dzięki temu, że Trust Jagielloński, mając kontakty w świecie akademickim brytyjskim, dbał o to, by albo członkowie tego trustu, albo ich przyjaciele przyjeżdżali tutaj i dawali wykłady, brali udział w seminariach. To jest jedna rzecz. Druga to są książki, niezwykle istotna działalność, dlatego że dzięki temu uzyskiwaliśmy dostęp do literatury, która jeśli była przywożona, to wiązało się to z ryzykiem, co należy tutaj podkreślić, o czym mówiła baronowa Caroline Cox. I można powiedzieć, że odwaga tych ludzi, my to doskonale rozumieliśmy, była niebywała, dlatego że wprawdzie byli obcokrajowcami i chronił ich do pewnego stopnia immunitet, jakim zwykle mają cudzoziemcy. Ambasada mogła występować w ich obronie, niemniej jednak byli narażeni na nie tylko inwigilację, ale także i na ewentualne aresztowania. I choć istniały różnice między Czechosłowacją, Polską i Węgrami, to jednak takie niebezpieczeństwo było całkowicie realne i była ta świadomość, towarzyszyła wszystkim, że jakiś rodzaj inwigilacji wciąż ma miejsce. Druga rzecz, a właściwie trzecia rzecz, która tutaj jest istotna, to te kontakty, akurat w moim wypadku, między innymi także polegały na tym, że ja byłem świadkiem posiedzeń, bodaj dwóch, Trustu Jagiellońskiego i mogłem się przyjrzeć, jak wygląda ta praca od strony organizacyjnej. Przesłanki ideowe były oczywiste, ale równocześnie też widać było, na czym polega działalność niewielkiego w gruncie rzeczy grona osób, które przygotowywało kolejne wizyty w Polsce od strony logistycznej, finansowej. I to było bardzo pouczające, a także było źródłem podziwu dla aktywności tych ludzi, którzy znaleźli w sobie wystarczająco dużo siły moralnej, by tego rodzaju działalność prowadzić. Rola obecnych tutaj członków tego trustu jest nie do przecenienia. Dodam jeszcze, że tak się złożyło, że w roku 86 i 87 byłem na stypendium Fundacji Landskorojskich w Londynie, więc miałem okazję jeszcze kontaktować się zarówno z Rogerem Scrutonem, jak i innymi osobami. Dzięki temu odwiedziłem Izbę Lordów i te kontakty miały także znaczenie, dlatego że dzięki nim także miałem możliwość dotarcia do osób pracujących w środowisku akademickim. I to oczywiście miało istotne znaczenie dla mnie w późniejszej mojej pracy naukowej. Tutaj wspominam zmarłego w 2014 roku profesora Denisa O'Keeffe, który był aktywnym działaczem Trustu Jagiellońskiego. Wielokrotnie był w Polsce, byliśmy bardzo blisko zaprzyjaźnieni. Wielokrotnie był w Krakowie i zatrzymywał się u nas. Także to oczywiście miało także taki wymiar prywatny, ale właśnie ten rodzaj kontaktu i bliski, i przyjacielski, ale także świadomość tego, czemu się służy i jaka sprawa stoi przed nami do urzeczywistnienia, to było niezwykle istotne. I muszę powiedzieć, że to, co stało się, przynajmniej w moim wypadku, w połowie lat 80., a wiemy, że ta działalność zaczęła się wcześniej, to miało ogromne znaczenie dla różnych środowisk, to trzeba podkreślić, a tym samym oczywiście dla polskiego społeczeństwa. To było niezwykle istotne. Po drugie, jeszcze warto podkreślić jedną rzecz, mianowicie kiedy słucha się opinii na temat działalności i postaw, jakie charakteryzowały Polaków w tamtych czasach z ust osób, które pochodzą z zewnątrz, mają inne doświadczenia, ale równocześnie posiadają wrażliwość i moralną, i społeczną, i intelektualną i potrafią ogarnąć to i zanalizować, to wtedy niejako ta odzwierciedlone ja narodu ukazuje się i można powiedzieć, że dzięki temu kontaktowi rozumiemy siebie samych lepiej i to jest niezwykłe doświadczenie dla przynajmniej części mojego pokolenia, które miało szczęście mieć do czynienia z osobami prowadzącymi tego typu działalność zarówno w Polsce, jak i w Wielkiej Brytanii. Oczywiście pamiętam o tym, że działalność Trustu sięgała dalej, bo to chodziło o Czechosłowację, o Węgry i o Rumunię, o ile pamiętam, bo Jessica także jeździła do Rumunii, miała tam kontakty. No szkoda, że okoliczności uniemożliwiały prowadzenie takiej akcji w Rosji, czyli w Związku Radzieckim, no ale to oczywiście to też pokazuje, prawda, jakie granice można było przekroczyć, a które granice właściwie były nieprzekraczalne, a w każdym razie wymagały wyjątkowych umiejętności ukrywania tego, co tak naprawdę chce się osiągnąć i z czym się przyjeżdża. Także jeżeli mogę, to chciałbym przede wszystkim serdecznie podziękować za te lata współpracy i działalności na rzecz wolności w Polsce i Rogerowi Scrutonowi, i obecnym tutaj paniom, i Markowi Matraszkowi, i mojemu czeskiemu koledze, z którym także wtedy miałem możliwość nawiązać kontakt, i wielu innym ludziom, o których tu nie wspomniałem, poza Denisem O'Keeffem, którzy działali bądź przez pewien czas byli związani z działalnością Trustu Jagiellońskiego. Wspomnę jeszcze tutaj ważną postać w tamtym czasie Henryka Woźniakowskiego ze Znaku. Dzisiaj oczywiście te relacje wyglądają trochę inaczej, niemniej jednak warto pamiętać, że to były czasy, kiedy Trust Jagielloński docierał do środowisk katolickich różnych. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. No i teraz właśnie może przejdziemy do strony czeskiej i punktu widzenia czeskiego.
Is it working? Yes. Szanowni Państwo, będę mówił po angielsku, przepraszam. Moja matka pochodzi z Przemyśla, czyli Polska jest dla mnie oczywiście wielką inspiracją. Ja byłem wyrzucony do Anglii przez matkę, która była bardzo niezadowolona z życia w Czechosłowacji, gdzie było bardzo ciężko, oczywiście w latach 50. i 60. I pracowałem później w takim instytucie, który się nazywał Keston College. To był instytut, który się zajmował stosunkami państwa i kościoła w Stanach komunistycznych, to znaczy też w Chinach na przykład, czy w Wietnamie i tak dalej. I ja stałem się członkiem tego instytutu i pracownikiem właśnie kiedy został wybrany na papieża Polak, czyli w październiku 78 roku. I wtedy już w Polsce wyglądało to bardzo ciekawo, bym powiedział, nawet z punktu widzenia z Anglii. Już wtedy czuł się taki ferment już w Polsce, a papież oczywiście jakby był wielką inspiracją dla niezależnych ruchów tutaj. No i ja się zajmowałem Polską, o dziwo. Pochodziłem z Czechosłowacji, ale miałem właśnie pracę, właśnie bardzo pisałem o Polsce i się interesowałem. Well, now I have to start in English. Because nie przygotowałem sobie wypowiedź po polsku niestety i będąc całe życie poza Polską, oczywiście zapomina się nawet języka macierzystego. To jest niestety taki los. Well, when I was at Keston, Roger Scruton here somehow, I don't know whether he read an article of mine or something, discovered me there and asked me to see him. And this was a very crucial point in my life because I was studying at LSE before, political philosophy, and although conservative from birth, really, you know, matka z Przemyśla, it's difficult not to be conservative, but nevertheless, you know, a young man, of course, has hazy ideas about. I was very young when I came to Britain in '67. I had to do my A levels, and but of course, I, being inspired by the Polish events, as I said, the ferment in Poland, I started a Czech exile publishing, but a specific one. You see, there were a number of publishers in exile, not from Russia, from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary, but they were usually publishing things that writers that were also in exile. But I was inspired and I wanted to publish just things that are being done in samizdat, in this unofficial kind of primitive, of course, publishing, but there are some great works. Now, Roger, of course, had people who were going to visit the country and was in touch with the dissidents, particularly the academic ones, and so he could bring things back to me, which were very important. I published a couple of these underground seminars. I remember one on Heidegger and one, God knows on what, I've forgotten what it was. It's a long time ago, you see. And these contacts were important, but we are here to celebrate his knighthood in a way, but also his importance for his contribution to the conservative thinking. And I think that's far greater even than those important contacts that he had in Czechoslovakia in those difficult, very dark days, and in Poland, Hungary. Because conservatism is very often very vague and unsure of itself. And it is very important to have a cogent, rational, systematic exposition. You see, when I came to see Roger, I remember, we wouldn't know, of course, but I remember that my greatest surprise was when he wrote somewhere that patriotism is extremely important for the existence of loyalty, democracy, and politics in general, that you cannot have politics if there is no unity of the people that practice that. He was arguing for the importance of that which today is under a strong attack. And because of his contacts in Poland and Czechoslovakia, of course, all his books are published here, as you can see outside, and they are also published in the Czech Republic now. In fact, if there is a conservative movement in Bohemia, in what we call Czechia now, I don't know, it's a funny name. If there is any worthwhile conservatism, it is due to him. It is his influence that made it possible. It's not a very strong movement, of course, because we are traditionally a left-wing country, but nevertheless, it is extremely important. And it is after that I have read almost all his books and realized how important it is to argue for the importance of prejudice, for instance. I had all conservative prejudices, but I couldn't rationalize them so well, you see, as he can. I realized through his writings that there's no direction in history. Of course, I discovered that in Lord Acton and Burke as well, that there is no actually moral or spiritual progress, as so many people would have. And there's also no will of the people in that Jacobin meaning of the French Revolution, of course, and his doubts about social contract are also very important, unless one thinks of social contract between the dead and the ones that are not yet born. So the fact that a territorial jurisdiction is the root of government loyalty to any government should be very important for us in these days where internationalism, disguised as being based on human rights, freedom, and God knows what, is eroding the only home that we have, and that home is the national state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we are back to Roger, as is fitting. We started with Roger, we're back to Roger, our alpha and our omega, and I thought that perhaps we might have time for a few questions from the room, but it turns out that we don't. We only have a few minutes left, so perhaps you have a question? You have a comment. Go ahead.
Ja chciałbym tylko jeszcze dorzucić dwa nazwiska, ponieważ Miłek wspominał Denisa O'Keeffe, ludzi, którzy już odeszli. Chciałem jeszcze wspomnieć Davida Levy, który ma też ogromne zasługi, przyjeżdżał do nas. I chciałem jeszcze wspomnieć Krzysztofa Michalskiego. Ja poznałem Rogera dzięki Krzysztofowi Michalskiemu. To miał być też bardzo konserwatywny, wspierający myśl konserwatywną instytut w Wiedniu i odgrywał wówczas bardzo wielką rolę. Myśmy potem mieli przecież wszyscy pracować w projekcie na temat intelektualistów. Nie wiem, Agnieszko, czy pamiętasz. Także chciałem te dwa nazwiska wspomnieć. Krzysztof Michalski i David Levy, którzy już odeszli, nie są wśród nas. Dziękuję.
Roger, would you like to finish with a few words of, what was it, sustained, cogent, coherent?
Well, I doubt that I can say anything to cap what has been said. I thank you, everybody, for those memories of that time. I suppose the only thing I would like to add is that our adventure was conceived in a very different time, when Europe was divided between a part where there was total control from the Communist Party, and people lived largely in fear of that party, and our part of Europe, in which we rejoiced in freedoms that were not known here. And of course, in Britain in particular, we had a long practice of using those freedoms in order to express and encourage in each other every possible eccentricity. You know, it was part of the joy of being English to me, and I think to all of us in our little community, that you could be absurd. You could be completely independent of the surrounding order. You could defy it, laugh at it. All the things that, of course, are increasingly not possible in an Islamized Europe, but were very possible then. And one of the when we got together to form the Jagiellonian Trust, it was in that spirit. We knew that it was eccentric, that we were defying the norms around us, and that we were making a joke of ourselves and also a joke of the rest of the world. And that was part of what helped us to go on. I think the whole thing was conducted in a spirit of great humor. Every now and then, of course, the reality and the danger impressed itself upon us, but our actual meetings, as Marek knows from perusing that book of minutes, were hilarious. We ended the evening always, after many bottles of wine, in the highest of spirits, going out into the world like Don Quixote on Rocinante, prepared to challenge all the windmills around us. And the next day we put it into action. And I think that spirit of humorous defiance of the world is something that was wonderful then and is much needed now. So.
Thank you very much, Roger. And thank you also, in addition to everything else, for the wine and the food. And I think on that note, it is time to end. Thank you very much.